Hey everyone, it's good to see everyone in a crowded room, which is good. People still just coming in. High-speed security. It feeds in quite well to the keynote speech, just about how speed is important. Speed is important for organisations. There's a lot of change going on. My talk today is on what that means from a security perspective. And in most cases, for most organisations, security kind of hasn't caught up with the rapidly changing nature of the world, and especially in tech. And so how can you do that within your own organisations? How can you try and keep up with this rapidly changing environment? Clicker clicking. There we go. Right, so very brief slide about who we are. So I'm Dadelszen, one of the co-founders of Lateral Security. We were founded in 2008. I've been a professional hacker since the 90s. I'm now like old, but I've had a lot of fun doing it. And so Lateral Security, we've got an office down here in Christchurch. We essentially provide both advisory services and testing services in the security space. We've been doing it for a while now, and it's good to be down here. There we go. Right, what are the objectives of today? Basically, I want to get you to understand why security has been becoming more complex and give you some techniques for improving the security in your organisations. Now, why is data privacy and protection important? You talk. Everyone here was in the keynote, right? You all talked about how you were collecting data, everyone's collecting data and all that sort of thing, right? What happens when you don't secure the stuff that you're collecting? What happens when the things that you've been entrusted with don't work and you haven't put enough effort into your security? I assume everyone here has heard about the Air New Zealand and the Ministry of Culture and Heritage breaches recently in the last month. I'll take you a little bit through about why those happened and what that meant, right? So Air New Zealand, it's a very simple case. It was a phishing attack, right? So people who don't understand phishing, that was someone emailed some of the staff members, got their usernames and passwords, got into the systems and captured that data. I've got a good friend who works at Google. He presented at a security hacking conference probably about 15 years ago. What he presented on is, we still haven't solved funnycats.exe. Someone can send us an email of funnycats.exe, someone's going to click on it, someone's going to get compromised, and it's all done. He did that presentation for the first time round in about probably 2005. He did it again in 2015 using the exact same slides, and nothing had changed. So we still haven't solved the fundamental issue that we have users that aren't aware of security, they click on things that they shouldn't click on, they input data that they shouldn't input. We get issues. That was the New Zealand breach, effectively. Ministry of Culture and Heritage was a different case. This was a classic case of shadow IT, right? So this was one part of the organisation going out there needing to fulfil a business need, whether because the current IT structure was too slow or whatever, they went out and purchased their own needs. Nothing got done from a security perspective. There was a security vulnerability in there. The interesting one about that is that the way that they found out about it was because they were reported fraud on the cases. Right? So where in New Zealand was hey, we think someone got access to the data and you may be compromised. Right? Ministry of Culture and Heritage was fraud is being actively performed based on the data that was captured from our site. Right? It was only, in New Zealand, I think it had to go to about 150,000 people. Ministry of Culture and Heritage was only about 250, but it was kids. It was people that were putting their things like their passport details and those sorts of things in to be able to sail around New Zealand. So a lot less people, but it was obviously an impactful breach because the fraud was being conducted at the time. So those are two New Zealand organisations. This has only happened in, the last 3 weeks or so, about why, while we are speeding towards collecting of data and collecting all this information, creating all of these things, if we don't worry about the security of these things, we actually put our organisations at big risk. Not only from an organisational perspective, but also from a personal perspective, from a citizen perspective, right? So it's not just about protecting your organisation, it's about protecting the people in New Zealand, the people in the world, everything else. So, what are some of the current issues? We talk about speed, right? We talk about always be making, okay? What happens if you're always making stuff, but the people that are making it don't understand security, right? And what we've had in the past is that security is the gatekeeper, right? Security is the roadblock at the end of the process. You make something and then you get it security reviewed before you put it out to public, right? Whatever, like there's the gateway to whatever we're doing. The more that we do, the faster that we do things, makes it so much more difficult to be able to be in that gatekeeper role and perform security across everything that you're doing, because we're just doing things too quickly. There's too much going on. Changing developer environment. We talked about agile versus waterfall essentially in the keynote, right? So when you are having 2-week sprints, you can't go out and get everything tested to the nth degree every 2 weeks before you put it live, right? It's just not going to work. You can't keep up with that speed. And the swiftly changing security landscape, more and more people are looking at security, more and more people are finding vulnerabilities. There are new things coming out every time. Security loves complexity. Every time you add complexity to something, you create a security issue, essentially, right? And so the more complex things are created, the more complex our world becomes. You talk about things like the Internet of Things and all those sorts of things. Every time we add complexity, we add security issues. And those things may not even be things that you're doing inside your own environment. It can be the landscape out on the internet, out in the greater world that is changing, even if yourself and your organisation is standing still. So it's not just about the speed of change inside your organisation, it's about the speed of change outside your organisation as well. So I've got a couple of things just to go through. We've haven't got too much time. It's a fairly short talk, but I've just got 3 things to basically go through. So the first one is we talk about the security being the gatekeepers, right? About your security team is who you have to go to get sign off to get something done. That needs to change. You need to move security into basically everyone's responsibility within an organisation. When everyone is making, everyone also has to be securing at the same time, right? Otherwise, you're not going to keep up with the change, and basically things are going to slip through the gap. So you can't just rely on the security team alone to perform the security function within your organisation. You need to move your security team more to an assurance and a validation role so that they are checking everything that's going on in the organisation, but that you're setting up your structure such that security is built into everything you do and everyone is responsible for it and everyone is aware of it. That includes it means you have to do things like training. You've got to have your standards set up. You've got to have your models in place that are secure. So you're secure by design. You're secure in your model. Everything has to be thought of from security from the ground up, because we can't just put security on at the last minute, right? We still get calls at least, I'd say, every couple of weeks of someone ringing up saying, we've got something new going live in a week, can you help us? Right? We get that all the time. We've always had it, right? And it hasn't changed in the last, 20 years I've been doing this job. We can't do that from security if we're changing things all the time. It's never going to work. So we have to build security into everything we do, and that includes building into all the people that we've got, training the people into security and making everyone responsible for security within an organisation. The next one to talk about is don't assume you're good, don't assume you're never going to get compromised, right? The rate of change, the rate of things that we are pushing out means that we have to assume that at some point in time, there's going to be a compromise, you're going to get done, right? Because we can't, again, it's that speed of catch up. We can't catch up with everything we're doing. There are going to be things that we miss. So assume at some point you're going to have a security incident. When you're talking about security, when you're thinking about your security controls and all those sorts of things, you have to be thinking about both. So there are 3 types of controls. I'll get into a bit of risk assessment stuff, right? 3 types of controls. There's preventative controls, stopping something happening. There are detective controls, how do you know something's happened? And there are responsive controls, what do you do when something happens? Okay? And a lot of the focus that we put on is putting it on the preventative controls, how to stop something happening, right? If we change that mindset and we assume something's going to happen, now we have to turn that into the detective and the responsive controls. So a really good exercise I did with a large telco out of Australia. We were training the SOC. And what we did is we went over there, and the first time we went over there, we basically said to the SOC, right, we're here today, we're going to do something on your network, it's going to be in this area, you've got to try and detect us. And so we did that, and they detected us, and that was great. And then the second time we went over there, said, okay, so we're here today, you know we're in the network, you don't know where we're going to attack this time. you've got to find us from anywhere. And so we did that, and they worked through that, and they found us anywhere. And then the next time we went over, and we didn't even go over, and then we said, well, we're going to do something this month, right? We're not going to tell you what. We're not going to tell you when. You've got to try and detect us. And then you turn that around and you incentivize, right? I like gamification, right? So if you can gamify security. So you go, okay, so the person who detects us, I know they go out and get a free dinner and they get to level 1. Right? The more levels you get a bonus, right? So you level up your staff. And so in this case, what you're doing is you're incentivizing that security team. They know there's an incident. They know there's something happening and they're looking for it. And guess what happened, right? They found stuff that they weren't expressly looking for. They found things that weren't us, right? Because they were looking, right? So there was that assumption there that they knew something was going on, so look for it. Right? Do something about it. And that's quite a change to always just trying to stop something occurring, right? To going, okay, it's going to occur. Let's try and find it and minimize the impact. So the other one about controls is generally they minimize either likelihood or impact of an event occurring, right? And again, most of the controls we focus on minimizing the likelihood, right, that something occurs. But what you can also do is you focus on controls that stop impact or minimize impact. So when something happens, it doesn't make a big issue, right? We've got the controls in place that are going to stop the thing being a major issue and instead something that we can deal with. So it's that mindset of rather than just always trying to stop the hackers getting in, they're going to get in. They're always going to win. We always win. That's what's so fun about our jobs. Right. The next one is about risk prioritization, right? So again, there is too much changing to be able to fully analyze and assess everything that an organisation is doing nowadays, right? We're never going to get full coverage across what someone is doing. So how do we prioritise what we're going to look at? And especially where you've got, security is a limited resource, security skills are a limited skill set. We can't get across everything. How do we focus that in the areas we need to focus on? That's where risk management can help, right? So you can, I'll go through a bit of a structured approach to this, but essentially, you can target the controls that have the greatest impact on risk, and you can do that organisation-wide, because there are certain controls that may just resolve security in one area, and there are others that are going to be across the board well. If there's one control, so if you asked me 15 years ago what I'd wish every single company in New Zealand did properly to stop security, it would be patching. If you ask me today what every single company should do to stop security vulnerabilities, it'd be patching, right? Some of the basic things are the ones that have an impact across everything we do, rather than specifically focused at certain things, and that's where we can get our best bang for buck from a risk perspective. And then also it's about understanding data. Right? So rather than going into a systems-focused environment, right, it's about the data that you need to protect. We talked about the collection of data and that in the keynote, right? So focusing on the information itself and how you protect the information regardless of where that information resides. One of the changes we're seeing is that information no longer resides in the central location, right? It's no longer on your server in your data center, right? It's throughout the cloud. It's multiple clouds. It's hybrids. It's everything. It's everywhere all at once. And so, rather than relying on individual systems, it's about looking at an environment for the data itself and how we protect the data wherever it flies. Okay, so this is a one process I use for how to think about a system and analyse what we need to do about it. Now, this is an 8-step process which was developed for the all of government certification process for a large range of our governmental systems. Now, those ones are like 3-year reviews, and so this process is quite a large process. But we also use this within organisations that do things like agile development, right? And so that every time you create a story, for example, you can go through this process. And one of the things that we recommend is thinking about things like malicious user stories. So every time you write a user story, you think about that story in a malicious manner. What can you do with that to manipulate it? So basically, 8-step process. First thing is you have to understand what it is you're trying to protect, you're trying to understand, right? This is probably one of the hardest questions to answer because with interconnected systems and all those sorts of things, scope can grow out quite significantly. So understanding what it is you're trying to look at is a very good first step and needs to be done properly. Once you've got that, what are the risks to that environment? What are the risks to the data? What are the risks to the systems? You've got to understand the risks that you're trying to mitigate against so that you can put the mitigations in place. Then you understand what controls are needed to mitigate the risks. Now what that does is that says, for your organisation, how good is good enough? Because security is never you're never absolute, right? You're never going to be secure. It's never going to happen. Different organisations have different profiles in terms of their risk acceptance. Right? So you have to understand that within the culture of your organisation, within the decision-making process of your organisation to say, when is it good enough? Right? And so basically you have your risks, you put your recommended controls, and you get essentially a target, right? And that's your good enough state. That way you know now what controls you need to implement to be able to hit your target. Then obviously you implement the controls, right? You go through, you design the controls, you put that in place. Once you've got that, how do you know that the controls that you have implemented are effective? Right? They have to be in place and working. It's not good enough just to have a control. The control has to be effective. Right? So what tests are you going to do for that control to be able to ensure that it's in place and effective? What do you do once you've designed the test? You test. Right? So you go through, you do an assessment of that control. Now that assessment it can be a whole range of things. So it can be as small as you're putting a new form on your web page so you know that you need to do data validation on that form. Okay? So you can have a test in how do we know that we've got the correct data validation on a form? Right? It can be physical. It can be we are moving into a new building. How do we know that the new building is secure? Well, the building has locks. How do we know that the locks are secure? Right? We have a test to get through locks. It can be people, right? We know that the risk is that our people may let people through the door. Shoulder surfing through an open door. So what's the control we needed? We need to put in some training to understand why that's not a good thing. Right, how do we test that the control is working? That's where we get to have some fun. We do things like social engineering exercises where we will walk into organisations and you run up to a door and you go, hey, I've just forgotten my lunch upstairs or my swipe card or whatever. People will let you in all the time, pretty much. You can get into any building in New Zealand, it's easy. Another one, I was talking to one of the presenters about, USB sticks. We hand USB sticks around for all the slides and all those sorts of things. We go and print. If we're targeting an organisation, we'll go to a printer, we'll get targeted USB sticks with their logos on the USB sticks, we'll put malware on the USB sticks and we'll drop them around the place just to see who picks them up and plugs them in. Even better than dropping them around, you can courier them to a specific individual. Right? So if you get a logoed USB stick to you in a courier, hands up, how many people would plug that in? Pretty much every single person in this room would plug in a couriered USB stick if they go straight to you. Right? So that is where you can test your training. And that's how much fun we have, because it's good fun. Once you've tested the controls, then you can determine what the current risk is. Have you hit your target? Right? Is your control in place and working, and have you met your target? Once you know what your current risk is, you can then accept the risk. Right? Because most of security is about risk acceptance, and what you find, especially with fast-moving organisations, is that the risk tolerance is higher. Right? So trying to understand the risk tolerance and make your security processes in line with the risk tolerance of the organisation is important. Right? There's no point putting a whole bunch of risk structure and everything like that to try and minimise risks. If the organisation has a higher risk structure than that, you're just spending effort where you can be spending it elsewhere. Right? So it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It's not about checklists. It's not about following standards and following protocols and all that sort of stuff. It's about understanding the environment that you're working in, putting in the controls specific to your environment and working within that model. So it was actually a very quick talk. I've only got 5 minutes left. Key takeaways, right? Spread security responsibility across the organisation. You can't have that in a single team, right? You're never going to keep up with the change that you're having. Assume you're going to get compromised. Make sure that you're working in an environment that makes that assumption and you're putting the controls in place to minimize things when they happen, and use risk management to set focus, right? Focus your efforts on the areas that matter. And I am bang on 5 minutes to go, which means that we have time for questions.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. We've had 2 questions put through Slido. So if you do want to ask a question, go to Attendify.
One
we'll
more.
ask these.
You'll never find a security guy that'll put in a URL when someone says it in a room in a presentation. Just saying.
Okay, the first question here, what would be the next step for an IT professional to learn more about and get into security?
Good question. So there are some very good, especially if we're talking Canterbury, there are some very good places to learn more. One of them is ISIG, which is the Information Security Interest Group. They run this Thursday? Next Thursday? Yeah, they run on Thursdays. isig.org.nz. Basically, that can gets a range of people. It's designed for people to come along, learn about security, and do that. The other one is there is ChickOn, which is coming up in the 13th, 14th of October, somewhere around there, which is a security conference which is running at Canterbury Uni still? Running at the Arts Centre this year. Running at the Arts Centre, so there's a conference that's essentially a security conference, a bunch of people standing up, talking security. Those are the areas that you go to learn about it. Hands-on is always better. I hire security people, right? So what I look for from a security person or from someone I hire is that spark of enthusiasm and the hands-onness. It's the drive. So regardless of what you're doing or what your current job is, it's about that thirst for security knowledge. And it's really good to do training when you can see the spark in someone's eyes when you actually get them to understand this stuff. I've trained developers, I've lectured at Canterbury University and those sorts of things, and you can see it in people's eyes when they actually understand that security concept truly for the first time, and it flicks something in you and you never look back.
Beautiful. Next one's about, I guess, mobile data. How's your world changed from early days to as everything's gone to mobile apps and phones and all that world?
So that's the data-centric thing I was talking about before, where previously all of your data was in a single location. You create walls. You always had the castle moat analogy, where you protect everything, you build all of your walls out. You can't do that anymore because data is spread. It's not just from things like the mobile, which is mobile apps are just apps on a phone, but it's the data that's important and where the data lives and how we protect the data in whichever location it exists.
Cool. And what's your favourite gamification thing you've ever done? What's your favourite gamification you've ever done?
That's a hard question. What's my favourite one I've done? So one thing we use sometimes, people talk about red teams, right? So red teaming is essentially where you have a no-holds-barred attack on an organisation, kind of like we think we're secure, so we're going to get in for that. One thing that I recommend for organisations is you can have a wild card, right? So in the security world, there's things called O-days, which are vulnerabilities that no one has discovered yet or that no one has publicly disclosed. So when you're doing a security test, you can hold a couple of ACE cards, which are potential O-days that you can play and say, okay, I'm going to pretend that I've got this vulnerability and get onto that site. And by doing that, you can mimic certain types of attackers, especially when you're in not so much, maybe some Canterbury organisations, but when you're talking about, say, nation-state analysis and that kind of stuff, where some of the data that you're trying to protect, the people attacking it, one, are willing to burn O-days, which can get up to $100,000, $200,000, so they're quite expensive, and two, have the resources available to be able to find and execute them. Right. So an organisation like ours isn't going to burn $200,000 on an exploit to compromise an organisation, but you can mimic that in part of what you're doing by using wildcards.
Cool. And what's the most shocking situation you've walked into?
No. I'll decline to answer that.
You don't have to name a name. Right, brilliant. Thank you very much. If everyone could show their